Deep in the pine forests of Montana, where nature writes its own rules, a friendship was born. One that defied instincts, expectations, and even the laws of the wild. Jessica Mitchell never imagined that her golden retriever puppy, Buddy, would bring home something so unexpected. But when he slipped under the backyard fence one chilly autumn afternoon, he didn't return alone. Nestled in the underbrush, barely clinging to life, was a frail bobcat cub, abandoned, frightened, and too weak to survive on its own. What followed was nothing short of remarkable. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, Buddy and the bobcat, whom Jessica named Jessie, formed an unbreakable bond. Against all odds, the two young animals became inseparable, playing, learning, and growing side by side. But the wild has its own plans, and as Jessie grew stronger, the inevitable loomed. Her return to the life she was meant to live. What happened when nature called? And could a bond formed in childhood withstand the pull of the wild? This is the extraordinary story of trust, friendship, and the moment when love means letting go.
The late autumn wind whistled through the dense pine forests of northern Montana, carrying with it the first hints of winter's approach. Jessica Mitchell stood at her kitchen window, warming her hands around a steaming mug of coffee as she watched the golden leaves dance across her sprawling backyard. The property, nestled against the edge of the wilderness, had been her dream come true when she purchased it 3 years ago. 5 acres of land backing up to thousands of acres of protected forest, the perfect place to raise her golden retriever puppy, Buddy. At just 8 months old, Buddy was everything Jessica had hoped for in a companion. His honey-colored coat gleamed in the sunlight, and his boundless energy brought life to the remote property she called home. As a wildlife photographer working primarily from her home studio, Jessica appreciated both the solitude of her location and the companionship Buddy provided. She glanced at the clock, 3:30 p.m. Usually around this time, Buddy would be pawing at the back door, eager for his afternoon play session in the fenced portion of the yard. But today, an unusual silence filled the house. Setting down her coffee mug, Jessica called out, "Buddy, where are you, boy?" The lack of the familiar clicking of paws against hardwood floors sent a shiver down her spine. She distinctly remembered letting him out for a quick bathroom break just 20 minutes ago, but now there was no sign of him. Jessica hurried to the back door, her heart beginning to race as she scanned the yard. The fence was secure. She checked it religiously, but Buddy was nowhere in sight. "Buddy!" she called again, her voice carrying across the property. The wind picked up, rustling the trees and drowning out any response she might have heard. Grabbing her jacket from the hook by the door, Jessica stepped outside, her boots crunching against the fallen leaves. That's when she heard it, a soft whimper coming from beyond the fenced area, near the tree line where her property met the wilderness. Following the sound, she discovered a small gap beneath the fence, freshly dug and just large enough for an adventurous puppy to squeeze through. Buddy had never attempted to dig under the fence before, and the discovery sent a fresh wave of worry through her. Jessica quickly found the gate and made her way toward the sounds, which now included gentle, playful barks mixed with unfamiliar noises. As she rounded a large boulder that marked the boundary between her landscaped yard and the wild forest beyond, she stopped dead in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. There was Buddy, his tail wagging enthusiastically as he circled what appeared to be a small, trembling form huddled against the base of an old pine tree. Jessica's trained eye immediately recognized the distinctive tufted ears and spotted coat of a bobcat cub, though its poor condition was apparent even from a distance. The cub's fur was matted and dull, its small frame noticeably thin, and its cries were weak and pitiful. "Buddy," Jessica called softly, Not wanting to startle either animal, her puppy looked up, gave a happy bark, and bounded over to her, clearly proud of his discovery. But instead of staying by her side as he usually would, he immediately returned to the bobcat cub, gently nudging it with his nose. Jessica's mind raced. As a wildlife photographer, she had documented many species in their natural habitat and had contacts within the local wildlife rehabilitation community. She knew that finding a bobcat cub alone, especially one in such poor condition, was highly unusual for this time of year. Cubs typically stayed with their mothers until they were about 8 months old, and this one couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 months old. Cautiously, she approached the pair, speaking in soft, soothing tones. "Easy there, little one. It's okay." The cub's eyes, though frightened, showed no sign of aggression, only exhaustion and desperation. Years of experience with wildlife told her that this cub was far too weak to pose any real threat, though she maintained a respectful distance. Buddy's behavior was remarkable. Rather than displaying the excited, possibly overwhelming energy typical of a golden retriever puppy, he seemed to understand the cub's fragile state. He lay down nearby, his body language calm and non-threatening, occasionally giving small, encouraging whines. Making a quick decision, Jessica returned to her house and gathered supplies. A thick towel, a small pet carrier she used for her occasional foster cats, and a pair of heavy gloves. She also grabbed her phone and immediately dialed the number for Sarah Henderson, a licensed wildlife rehabilitator she had worked with on several photography projects. "Sarah? It's Jessica Mitchell. I've got a situation here. Buddy found a bobcat cub, and it's in really rough shape." She quickly described the cub's condition and location while making her way back to the animals. "Don't try to approach it without proper equipment," Sarah warned. "I can be there in about an hour. Even a weak cub could be dangerous. I've got my handling gloves, and honestly, Sarah, this little one doesn't look like it could hurt a fly right now. It's severely malnourished, and I'm worried it won't last an hour. Buddy's already made friends with it, if you can believe that." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Your golden retriever puppy is hanging out with a bobcat cub? I know how it sounds, but yes, he actually led me to it. The cub seems to be taking comfort in his presence." Sarah sighed. "Okay, you've got more wildlife experience than most. If you think you can safely contain it, do so, but be extremely careful. Keep it warm but not too warm, and don't attempt to feed it anything. I'll be there as soon as I can." Following Sarah's instructions, Jessica approached the animal slowly, speaking in gentle tones. The cub watched her with wary eyes, but made no attempt to flee or show aggression. Whether from exhaustion or an innate understanding that help was being offered, it remained still as Jessica carefully wrapped it in the towel. Up close, the cub's condition was even more heartbreaking. Its ribs were visible beneath its dirt-matted fur, and one of its back legs showed signs of a minor injury, nothing severe, but enough to have potentially separated it from its mother during a crucial hunting or training period. Jessica estimated it weighed no more than 8 pounds, far too little for its apparent age. As she lifted the bundled cub, Buddy stayed right beside her, his tail wagging slowly, his eyes never leaving the small package in her arms. The cub, surprisingly, released a soft sound that was almost a purr as Jessica cradled it against her chest. Inside the house, Jessica prepared a quiet, warm space in her mud room, placing the pet carrier on its side and lining it with soft blankets. She carefully settled the cub inside, making sure it had enough room to move but would feel secure. Buddy immediately lay down in front of the carrier, assuming a protective position. "You're quite the hero today, aren't you, boy?" Jessica scratched behind his ears, earning a happy tail thump against the floor. "What made you dig under that fence? Did you hear our little friend crying?" The next hour passed slowly as they waited for Sarah to arrive. Jessica used the time to document the cub's condition with her camera, taking careful notes about its behavior and physical state. She noticed that despite its weakness, the cub remained alert, its eyes following Buddy's movements with what seemed like curiosity rather than fear. When Sarah's truck finally pulled up the gravel driveway, the wildlife rehabilitator was prepared for the worst, possibly having to separate an aggressive wild animal from domestic pets. Instead, she found herself staring in amazement at the scene before her. A golden retriever puppy calmly guarding a carrier containing a bobcat cub that seemed more interested in watching its new canine friend than showing any signs of stress or fear. "Well, I'll be damned," Sarah muttered, kneeling down to examine the cub. "In 15 years of wildlife rehabilitation, I've never seen anything quite like this." The initial examination revealed what Jessica had suspected. The cub was severely malnourished and dehydrated, with a minor sprain in its back leg that had likely been the starting point of its troubles. "She's a female," Sarah announced, "probably around 4 months old. Old enough to be learning hunting skills from her mother, but not old enough to survive on her own. The injury probably slowed her down, separated her from Mom, and it's been downhill from there." "Will she make it?" Jessica asked, unconsciously placing a hand on Buddy's head for comfort. Sarah carefully administered some fluids with a syringe. "Hard to say for certain, but she's young and doesn't appear to have any severe injuries or illnesses. With proper care, she's got a good chance." She looked up at Jessica. "I hate to break up this unusual friendship, but I should really take her to our facility." Jessica bit her lip, watching as Buddy gently pawed at the carrier. What if I helped with her rehabilitation? I work from home, I have experience with wildlife, and I've helped you with recoveries before. She seems so comfortable here, and Buddy?" She gestured to her puppy, who hadn't left the cub's side since they found her. Sarah considered the proposal carefully. "It's highly unusual. We typically want to minimize human contact to ensure successful release back into the wild. But..." She watched as the cub reached out a small paw toward Buddy through the carrier's gate. "This is already an unusual case. If you're willing to follow strict protocols and understand that the goal is eventual release, we might be able to work something out. I'll need to clear it with the proper authorities, of course." And so began what the local community would soon come to know as the story of Buddy and Jessie. The name Jessica gave to the bobcat cub after noticing the way she would perk up whenever Jessica called out to Buddy, as if hoping the invitation to play extended to her as well. The first few weeks were critical. Under Sarah's guidance, and with frequent veterinary visits, Jessica established a careful feeding schedule to help Jessie regain her strength without overwhelming her system. The cub received a specialized diet designed to mimic what she would naturally eat in the wild, and her injured leg was treated with gentle physical therapy exercises. Buddy's role in Jessie's recovery proved to be far more significant than anyone could have anticipated. While the humans had to maintain a certain professional distance to ensure Jessie wouldn't become too habituated to people, Buddy seemed to instinctively understand how to interact with his wild friend. He would lie near her carrier for hours, sometimes playing with his own toys in view of her, demonstrating a gentleness that belied his young age. As Jessie grew stronger, she was moved to a larger enclosure in Jessica's heated garage, specially modified under Sarah's supervision to provide a more natural environment while still protecting the cub from the harsh Montana winter. It was here that the true depth of the unlikely friendship began to emerge. Jessie's natural instincts remained intact. She would practice stalking and pouncing on toys, show appropriate wariness around strangers, and maintain many of the behaviors essential for her eventual return to the wild. But with Buddy, she displayed a different side altogether. Through the safety of her enclosure's mesh, they would engage in what could only be described as play. Buddy would run back and forth while Jessie tracked his movements, or they would bat at toys from opposite sides of the barrier. Jessica began documenting their interactions through her photography, capturing moments that seemed to defy conventional wisdom about natural enemies. Her first post about their story on her professional photography blog quickly gained attention, spreading from local wildlife enthusiasts to national nature photography communities. The story struck a chord with people around the country. Here was a pure example of compassion transcending traditional boundaries, a young dog who, instead of chasing or barking at a wild animal, had recognized another creature in need and acted to help. The fact that Buddy was still essentially a puppy himself made the story even more compelling. As winter deepened, Jessie's recovery progressed remarkably well. Her weight returned to normal, her fur regained its healthy luster, and her injured leg healed completely. She grew more confident in her movements, practicing hunting techniques with increasing skill on the enrichment toys Sarah provided. Yet through all these changes, her special bond with Buddy remained. The rehabilitation process wasn't without its challenges. As Jessie grew stronger, her wild nature became more prominent. There were days when she would pace her enclosure restlessly, her natural instincts clearly calling her to the freedom of the forest. During these times, Buddy would lie quietly nearby, his presence seeming to calm her agitation. Jessica worked hard to maintain the delicate balance between providing care and preventing too much domestication. She and Sarah developed creative ways to provide Jessie with natural experiences while keeping her safe. They set up training scenarios that would help develop her hunting skills, using moving targets and scent trails to simulate prey. Through it all, Buddy watched with apparent fascination, sometimes mimicking Jessie's stalking behavior in what Jessica came to think of as their shared learning experiences. As spring approached, Sarah began discussing the next phase of Jessie's rehabilitation. She's healthy, strong, and showing all the right instincts, she explained during one of her regular visits. We need to start thinking about release options. The words, though expected, still hit Jessica hard. She had known from the beginning that this was the goal, to help Jessie return to her natural life in the wild. But watching Buddy and Jessie interact through the mesh of the enclosure, their different species seeming so irrelevant to their friendship, made the prospect of separation more emotional than she had anticipated. Sarah, sensing Jessica's conflict, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. I know it's hard, but we've done our job, maybe better than we expected. Jessie is still very much a wild bobcat, and that's exactly what we wanted. The fact that she formed this unusual friendship doesn't change her fundamental nature. They decided on a soft release program at a nearby wildlife sanctuary. The facility had over 1,000 acres of protected land, complete with natural prey species and appropriate habitat. Most importantly, it was close enough that Jessica could continue to monitor Jessie's progress from a distance, using her wildlife photography skills to document the bobcat's return to the wild. The day of Jessie's move to the sanctuary dawned clear and cool, with the first hints of spring carrying promises of new beginnings. The transfer went smoothly. Jessie, now nearly full-grown, entered the transport carrier with minimal fuss, though she grew more alert when Buddy wasn't immediately visible. At the sanctuary, Jessie was released into a large transition enclosure, a halfway point between captivity and complete freedom. Here, she would have the chance to fully develop her hunting skills while still having access to supplementary food if needed. The enclosure was situated at the edge of the sanctuary's property, allowing Jessica to visit and observe from a designated viewing area without disturbing Jessie's gradual return to independence. What no one had anticipated was Buddy's reaction to Jessie's absence. The first few days after her departure, he would go to her empty enclosure in the garage, lying beside it as if waiting for his friend to return. His usual boundless energy seemed diminished, and he would perk up hopefully at any sound from the forest behind their house. Recognizing Buddy's distress, Jessica began taking him with her on her regular visits to document Jessie's progress at the sanctuary. Though the viewing area was necessarily distant from Jessie's enclosure, Buddy would sit alertly beside Jessica as she photographed their wild friend, his tail wagging whenever he caught glimpse of the familiar spotted coat. As weeks passed, Jessie grew more confident in her new environment. She successfully hunted the small prey animals that were introduced to her enclosure and showed increasing interest in the wilderness beyond her temporary boundaries. The sanctuary staff reported that she was displaying all the behaviors they hoped to see in a bobcat preparing for release. Finally, after 2 months in the transition enclosure, the day came for Jessie's final release. The sanctuary staff chose a location deep within the protected area, far from human habitation, but still within the range where Jessica could occasionally observe and photograph her from a safe distance. On the morning of the release, Jessica and Buddy were permitted to watch from a designated observation point as the sanctuary staff opened Jessie's transport carrier. The bobcat emerged cautiously, her muscular form a testament to how far she had come from the sickly cub Buddy had discovered in the forest. For a moment, Jessie paused at the edge of the carrier, scanning her surroundings. Her gaze seemed to find Jessica and Buddy in their distant position, and for a brief moment, she looked directly at them. Then, with the fluid grace characteristic of her species, she turned and disappeared into the forest. Buddy watched her go with pricked ears and alert posture, but he made no attempt to follow or call out. It was as if he, too, understood that this was the natural conclusion to their unusual friendship. In the months that followed, Jessica continued to visit the sanctuary, both to photograph wildlife and to catch occasional glimpses of Jessie. The bobcat had claimed a territory that included part of the sanctuary's northern section, and while she remained appropriately wild and wary, she seemed to tolerate Jessica's distant presence more than she did other humans. Whenever Buddy accompanied these visits, Jessica noticed something remarkable. On days when Jessie was nearby, Buddy would sit calmly at the observation point, his posture relaxed but attentive. On days when the bobcat was hunting in other parts of her territory, he showed less interest in staying at the viewing area. It was as if he could sense his old friend's presence, even from a distance. As spring turned to summer, Jessica's photography blog continued to document this extraordinary story. Her posts about Buddy and Jessie's friendship reached an even wider audience when a national wildlife magazine expressed interest in featuring their story. The article, titled "Unlikely Friends: The Dog Who Saved a Bobcat," highlighted not just the touching relationship between the two animals, but also the importance of responsible wildlife rehabilitation and the delicate balance between helping wild animals and maintaining their natural instincts. The story's impact rippled through the local community. The wildlife sanctuary saw an increase in donations and support, allowing them to expand their rehabilitation facilities. Sarah's Wildlife Rehabilitation Center received calls from people across the state wanting to learn more about proper protocols for helping injured wildlife. Jessica found herself giving talks at local schools about wildlife photography and conservation, always with Buddy by her side as a living example of compassion crossing species boundaries. 2 years after Jessie's initial rescue, Jessica received an excited call from one of the sanctuary's wildlife monitors. They had discovered something extraordinary. Jessie had given birth to her first litter of cubs in a den near the northern boundary of the sanctuary. The location she had chosen for her den was as close to the observation area as wild bobcats ever ventured, suggesting that perhaps some memory of safety and friendship still influenced her choices. With special permission from the sanctuary, Jessica set up a carefully concealed photography blind at a safe distance from the den. Over the next few weeks, she documented Jessie's new role as a mother. The once rescued cub was now a confident adult bobcat, teaching her own cubs the skills they would need to survive in the wild. On one memorable morning, as Jessica and Buddy sat quietly in the blind, they witnessed something that brought tears to Jessica's eyes. Jessie emerged from her den with her cubs, leading them on one of their first explorations of the world beyond their birthplace. As they passed within view of the blind, Jessie paused, her head turning directly toward their location. Though the blind was well camouflaged, her keen senses had detected their presence. Instead of hurrying her cubs away as most wild mothers would, Jessie sat calmly, watching the blind while her cubs played nearby. It was a moment that seemed to bridge the gap between wild and tame, past and present. Though she was now fully wild, living the life she was meant to live, some part of her remembered the kindness she had received during her most vulnerable time. Buddy, who had been lying quietly at Jessica's feet, raised his head and gave a single, soft whine of recognition. Jessie's ears twitched at the sound, and for a brief moment, her posture relaxed in a way that reminded Jessica of the days when she would play with Buddy through her enclosure mesh. Then, with a graceful movement, she gathered her cubs and continued on her way, disappearing into the forest that was now her home. That evening, as Jessica reviewed her photographs of the encounter, she reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. What had started as a simple act of kindness, a puppy following his instincts to help another creature in need, had grown into something far more significant. Their story had touched hearts, changed minds, and demonstrated that compassion knows no boundaries. Buddy, now a mature dog but still maintaining his gentle spirit, continued to accompany Jessica on her wildlife photography expeditions. Though their close interactions with Jessie were now just precious memories, her influence on their lives remained. Jessica noticed that Buddy showed the same gentle curiosity toward all wildlife they encountered in their work, maintaining a respectful distance but displaying none of the aggressive or fearful behaviors many dogs exhibit toward wild animals. The sanctuary established an educational program named in honor of Buddy and Jessie's story, teaching children about wildlife conservation and the importance of understanding and respecting wild animals. Jessica's photographs of their friendship became part of the program's materials, helping to illustrate the delicate balance between helping wildlife in need and maintaining their wild nature. Sarah, the wildlife rehabilitator who had helped make it all possible, often used their story in her training sessions for new wildlife rehabilitation volunteers. Sometimes, she would tell them, "The most extraordinary outcomes come from following our instincts to help, while still respecting the wild nature of the animals we work with." Buddy and Jessie taught us that kindness and professional wildlife rehabilitation aren't mutually exclusive. As for Jessie, she continued to thrive in her wild home, raising her cubs and maintaining her territory within the sanctuary's protected lands. Though she now lived the fully wild life she was meant to have, her story continued to inspire others. The friendship she had shared with Buddy as a cub had helped her survive to become a successful adult bobcat, proving that sometimes the path back to the wild can include unexpected friendships along the way. Jessica still visits the sanctuary regularly, always with Buddy by her side. Though they rarely catch glimpses of Jessie now, her presence is felt in the success of her cubs, in the programs her story inspired, and in the continuing bond between a photographer and her dog who once helped save a wild friend. Their story serves as a reminder that while wild animals must remain wild, the capacity for compassion knows no species barriers. In a world often divided by differences, the unlikely friendship between a golden retriever puppy and a bobcat cub continues to demonstrate that the most meaningful connections can arise from the simple act of reaching out to help another being in need. The legacy of Buddy and Jessie's friendship lives on in the hearts of those who witnessed it, in the educational programs it inspired, and in the renewed commitment to wildlife conservation it sparked in their community. It stands as a testament to the extraordinary possibilities that exist when we open our hearts to unexpected friendships while respecting the natural order that makes each species unique. As Jessica often reflects, watching Buddy doze peacefully after their visits to the sanctuary, sometimes the most profound lessons about love, friendship, and letting go come from the most unexpected teachers. In this case, a gentle golden retriever and the wild bobcat who became his first and most unusual friend.